slowed it.
Best I can.
Yeah. Not
Is this
slowly.
too fast?
You were sort of fast.
Is somebody going to tell me when to start? I'll see a light on the camera, I assume.
So no matter So no matter how the president gets them out, I think this country has a lot to think about in how we send our kids in harm's way.
The fight for Upper Manhattan.
It is not an opportunity to disrespect our President Barack Obama or to even compare him to Dick Cheney.
Watch Charlie Rangel battle for his congressional seat.
We were at war with the people in Iraq, and it was wrong.
Charles Rangel, Adriano Espaillat, Craig Schley, Clyde Williams, Joyce Johnson. This is one debate you don't want to miss.
Joyce, the
Joyce
war in
Johnson.
Afghanistan is an issue for the people of the 15th Congressional District because we're wasting money that should be spent here.
The League of Women Voters of the City of New York and Manhattan Neighborhood Network present the Democratic Candidates Debate for the New York State 13th Congressional District.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Tony Coffey, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters of the City of New York, which is a proud co-sponsor of this evening's event with Manhattan Neighborhood Network. During the next hour, you will hear from the 5 candidates for the Democratic nomination for Congressperson from the 13th Congressional District, which includes approximately 800,000 residents of Manhattan and the Bronx. The boundaries of this district are new this year as a result of the 2010 census, which revealed shifts in population nationwide that required a reduction of 2 seats in New York State's congressional delegation. The new lines were determined by order of a federal judge. The primary election, which will determine the Democratic candidate, will take place on June 26th. We are pleased that all 5 candidates in this contest are present, and we look forward to hearing their views on a range of subjects in which the Congress plays a role. They are Congressman Charles Rangel, State Senator Adriano Espaillat, Joyce Johnson, Clyde Williams, and Craig Schley.
Thank you.
They are seated here in the order of their closing statements, which was determined by lot prior to tonight. The questions I will ask were developed by the League, and the rules for this evening were set by us and agreed to by the candidates. After the first question, I will call for the candidates' responses in random order. Unless I say otherwise, each candidate will have up to 1.5 minutes to respond to each question, and I will ask as many questions as time allows, followed by closing statements. The timekeeper is seated in the front row and will provide a 30-second warning to each candidate. Now let us begin. Mr. Rangel, recent news reports stated that you were denied due process by the House Ethics Committee and should not have been censured for ethics violations. If this is shown to be true, how will it affect your ability to represent this district should you be reelected?
Well, I don't think these allegations have any impact on my ability to serve. Quite frankly, 83% of my constituents put confidence in me. If people would read the New York Times story that I think you refer, they would say that the committee who politically did what they had to do are now on investigation themselves. And many of the witnesses that were called by this special investigator took the Fifth Amendment, which is, was the right thing to do. And they also admitted violation of constitutional rights as relates to Congresswoman Waters. But I'm moving forward. There's so much to be done here. And I'm fortunate that I've never lost the confidence of the voters or my colleagues in the Congress, which I think you will see by their endorsements and things that colleagues do that work well with each other. But the June 26th date, I think all of us want to emphasize, and we want to thank the League of Women Voters and then because nobody runs in June anymore. Everyone is looking for November, everyone looks for September, but please, if anything, to remind people that the congressional race is on June the 26th, and just you focus attention so we can get the people to know us better. And we had such a short period of time between the time to decide and the time to run, so all of us are deeply appreciative of this.
Thank you, Mr. Rank. For this round only, I'll be putting a different question, the same one, to the other four candidates. Mr. Espaillat, you first. Please tell us one reason why you believe that you are the right person to represent this district for the next 2 years.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I want to thank the League of Women's Voters for sponsoring this debate. This is an important debate. I think we need to have a vigorous debate for the next couple of weeks. The voters will be coming out on June 26th and making a decision as to who their representative will be. Much has changed in this district. Not only the demographics that were changed by the three-judge panel, but a lot has changed since 1970. Back then, rent was very cheap. Drugs were in Harlem and in northern Manhattan. It was mainly heroin that was affecting the neighborhood. But when you graduated from college, you felt that the sky was the limit, that nothing could stop you, that you could almost were guaranteed a job, that you can move forward with your family, you can possibly even own a home in the future. Lots has changed. The world is not flat. And nowadays, things are vastly different. There are new challenges that are impacting the community. The rent is too high. Now you graduate from college and you have a looming student loan debt that has been recently determined by the federal government to be higher than credit card debt. So the challenges are vastly different. I think I bring a bold new voice to Congress, one that has the pulse of the community, that will be able not only to articulate those issues that they feel are important, but most important, I think that we can bring back some results. The DREAM Act is important. We want it to happen in Congress, and I'm looking forward to the debate. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson, the same question. Why do you believe you're the right person to represent this district for the next 2 years?
I come into this arena with cross-sector experience of 35 years in the private sector, in government, industry, as well as a tremendous footprint on community. Some 25 years ago when I came into this, coming off of being Director of Equal Employment Opportunity for Seagram, wanting to seek public office and wanting a career in public service, which has been my passion. I said I was going to Congress to put teeth in legislation, so the journey has been that. But the journey has been more, learning community, serving in significant capacities in our community, chairs of community planning boards, Democratic district leader, working with the Mitchell-Lama housing and tenants' rights. And so I have the breadth and depth of experience that I don't think anyone has. And it's frankly the same 40 years, while just a tiny bit younger, that the congressman himself. But what I think I bring to this more than anything, coming off of my private sector experience, the wherewithal, the knowledge, and I'll say the anxiety about getting the job done, results. Results are the face of change, and I think with not only in Congress, which is broken, and not only in Congress, which is home, we need someone who gets results, who can walk across the aisle, build relationships, broker common ground, and solve problems, because I think the American people are ready for someone who does just that. They're tired of the answers, and they're going to fire us if we don't do otherwise.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Williams, now you.
Good evening. First, let me thank you for inviting all of us to participate in this forum tonight. I'm running because there are decade-old problems that exist in this congressional district that I think that need to be resolved. When you look at the unemployment rate in the congressional district, it's twice the national average. When you look at the fact that African American and Latino men have an unemployment rate in our congressional district that's above 26%, and teenage unemployment rate is again twice the national average. These are real problems and real concerns that need to be addressed. When you look at the healthcare disparities that exist in our community, once again, I want to solve those problems. And the same thing with educational disparities that exist in our community. I think that over the last 40 years, Congressman Rangel has done a good job. And I respect for what he has done. And I think that he and Adam Clayton Powell actually made this seat relevant. But I believe now is time for change. And I believe that I am the best person to bring about that change. I believe that my background makes me uniquely qualified to serve. I'm the only person running as a challenger to Congressman Rangel that's actually worked in Washington, D.C. I'm the only person that's running as a challenger to the congressman that's actually worked for 2 presidents. I'm the only person running as a challenger that's actually worked in a government agency. I was Deputy Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, an agency that has oversight responsibility for the food stamp program, the WIC program, and the National School Lunch Program. And so I believe that right now, when we have a Washington, D.C. that is divided, a Washington, D.C. that has changed drastically over the last few years, that my background, as I said, makes me uniquely qualified to serve.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Schley.
Well, thank you very much to the League of Women Voters and all of the candidates here. Plain and simple, I'm running because I'm no different than my district. We want just what Obama wanted in 2008, to make a complete separation from the status quo, business as usual, the old guard. Unbought and unbossed is the word of the day. Our district is suffering from high unemployment, as has been enumerated here today, and also we have to be able to afford to be able to live there and do business. Every one of my candidates here, as they enumerate their connections with the status, with the establishment, they also walk away why they are not the candidates for it and why I am. I make a complete sea change, separation from the status quo, a clean break for the future. I want to be employed by the community. I am the representative of the here and now. My constituency has asked me to make sure that 2 things are made clear in this debate, that housing is the #1 issue, and that we talk about being able to afford to do business, which the legislation that most of my colleagues here have pushed and they've failed. And I fought on behalf of 71 businesses in our district to make sure they stay and not be priced out by the luxury homes that was developed under the plenty of this administration that we have here.
Thank you, Mr. Schley. For our next question, I will be asking for responses in a random order. What should the federal government do to strengthen the national economy and reduce unemployment? Please tell us if you would support another federal stimulus package. Ms. Johnson, would you go first, please?
I don't know whether I'd support another stimulus, because I don't know whether we can afford it. But I think the federal government must, in conjunction with the private sector, because that's where jobs are created, the private sector. The president has called upon states not to lay off some of their workers, because we're losing more jobs in the public sector than in the private sector. I think the federal government must really focus on jobs creation, new economies. I think we have an economic engine, the economic engine in small and entrepreneurial businesses. That's the money maker of the future. These are folks that already hire more than 50% of the workforce, and they are employing 60% of new workers. So it is that investment, but also working with the private sector to jumpstart, innovation, technology. All of this comes out of both the companion with the entrepreneurial and small businesses, the private sector, to start to create jobs. That innovation in technology and science, engineering are related fields, along with the environmental things.
Thank you. Mr. Schley?
Yes.
On the federal on the national economy and whether or not the federal government should issue a new stimulus package.
Well, one, I agree with Paul Krugman. He's a Princeton economist, and he says that we ought to stimulate our environment, our economic environment, on a short term. That can be played out locally by making sure our small businesses are stimulated with an injection of money, that they then are able to grow the economy by employing the people that live in the district, and they can start spending, and you can bring down the actually put money into the system through that means. 70% of our business employment come from small businesses. We live in a residential community that's central to our district, and this is what I've been fighting for, and this is what has to be changed as far as the excessive development in our communities and not enough spending and investment in the residential district and especially our small businesses. So a bailout, if a bailout is to be had, it should be directed toward the small businesses.
Thank you. Mr. Espaillat.
Oh, you know, lots has been said about the bailout, and we did bail out Detroit. We bailed out the banking institutions. But the main employer, the biggest employer across the United States is small business. And I think we haven't bailed them out. You know, we need to support small businesses. We need to make sure that we give them tax credits. We need to make sure that we give them tax cuts. But in addition to that, I want to say that right in the middle of the Deep Depression, Franklin D. Roosevelt implemented the minimum wage. He felt that even by helping small businesses, it wasn't enough. You can help small businesses all you want, but if the shoppers, the consumers, do not have money in their pockets, the business will have to shut down. So I believe it is time to reevaluate increasing nationally the minimum wage. Let's put some consumer power in the pockets of working class people, even of middle class people that are really having a hard time making ends meet. You put a couple of $1,000s in a working class family's pocket, they're going to go out and shop. They're going to go out and invest money in that small business. That's what we need. That's why we need to stimulate the economy. We've been failing consistently. We've been looking at this the wrong way, bailing out the big institutions and primarily the biggest employer, the small business owner, the mom and pop stores across America, across Main Street in America has been left behind.
Thank you, Mr. Espaillat. Mr. Rangel.
I don't think we ought to use the word stimulus because it carries with us a connotation that some people are just against it because a handful of people that were responsible for our economic problem received the major benefits of the stimulus. But if you really are talking about the economy, the one thing we have to recognize is that this deficit, like any deficit, whether it's a family, a community, a company, or the Congress, has to be dealt with. People don't mind borrowing, but when you find the interest that you have to pay is competing against the basic national security issues, there's something wrong. The problem that we face in the Congress is that the Republicans, as soon as the president was sworn in, vowed that they rather see him defeated than anything else. I was fortunate to be on the hit list with the Secretary Geithner and the president and half a dozen others. And so the real problem that we have to do is that we have to make certain that the capitalist system works, but the federal government's in there to help people. And like the senator said, if people don't have expendable income, if people can't buy, then there's no way in the world for small business to sell them anything. So laying off to cut the deficit is definitely not the answer.
Right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Williams.
I would not necessarily be against another stimulus, but I think before we do that, we should look at other things. I recently read a report by the Department of Transportation that said for every $1 billion you put in building the infrastructure of our country, you create 47,000 jobs. I think we need to look at things like that. And I think we need to figure out how we fund those kind of projects. And one of the ways I believe we could fund is we cut subsidies to oil companies and gas companies. They made some of the biggest record profits in the history of our country, and we're still giving them subsidies. I think it makes absolutely no sense. One of the other things I think we can do right now to actually employ people is actually train people for jobs that are available today. When you look across this country, there's so many people unemployed they're unemployed because they aren't trained to do the necessary jobs that are available. I once read a report recently by the Brookings Institute that said if we had trained people for all the jobs that are available today, unemployment rate would probably be around 7%. We have money right now to train people to be nurses. Instead, we're importing nurses from Bangkok, Thailand, and the Philippines. We can train people to be mechanics, plumbers, electricians, all the things that shortages of jobs are going to be coming up over the next decade. Those are the things I think we should focus on long before we decide whether or not we want to look at doing another stimulus package.
Thank you. On another issue, Despite promises, no changes have been made in immigration policies since 2008. Many young people who would be eligible for the DREAM Act are being deported, and thousands more are vulnerable. What would you do to halt these deportations? Mr. Espaillat?
The DREAM Act is not just a campaign slogan or soundbite for me. It is deeply personal because I'm an immigrant myself. You know, we lost a golden opportunity. We really lost a golden opportunity when we had control of both houses in Congress, when we had a Democratic president, and when we had the opportunity, the legislative opportunity to pass the DREAM Act. That's a no-brainer. We should really have full immigration reform or a road to citizenship. But the DREAM Act, which is the first phase of that, and one that grants young people the opportunity to access higher education, to be able to pay for college. It's critical, not only to them and their families, but to our nation. So to have passed that opportunity, that golden opportunity in the first year of the Obama administration was a major mistake. I plan to launch a national campaign. I plan to join Congressman Gutierrez, who's going around state by state, including in the 13th Congressional District. He has come here to organize the nation around fundamental and comprehensive immigration reform and the DREAM Act. Now, I passed legislation in Albany that allow undocumented students to pay in-state tuitions. I sponsor the New York DREAM Act legislation that I hope we will pass within the next 2 weeks and make it effective here in New York State. Those students shouldn't have to go around state by state, shopping around from California to Texas to New York, looking to access higher education.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, would you take that question on immigration, please?
Yes. One, I think we need to have real immigration reform. And I think that we need to have a real conversation with America and make it clear. There's no way humanly possible we could deport all the people here illegally. And I agree with the senator. We need to figure out a way to how we put them on the path to citizenship. The other thing I think we need to understand about immigration is an economic development issue. When you look at the fact that for years, you look at the people particularly who have gone to Silicon Valley, the people who invented Google, people who invented Yahoo. They came here as immigrants and they created the companies and the jobs that are viable here in America. They created hundreds of thousands of jobs for American citizens, and they created billions of dollars towards our economy. And so we need to have real immigration reform that looks at all aspects of immigration here in America.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rangel.
I think the question is how you got to get it done. The most hypocritical thing we have in this country is to knock immigration knowing that the hotel industry, the hospitality industry, all totally depend, the landscape and the farmers, and these people were invited here. No one got arrested for bringing the people in, only the people that got in hoping for a better way of life, which kind of sounds like what this country is supposed to be all about. The question is that no one fights harder than Congressman Gutierrez around the states in here. But he's already got the House worked up and ready to go. We passed it. The problem is that the Republicans said that they're not going to do anything, no matter how reasonable it sounds. And they come up with this cocky-mamie thing. Where in the world is 1/2 of 160? I mean, we can get the 51 votes to do it, but I really think we got to build up a moral quantity of people that go far beyond just Democrats and Republicans. It's morally wrong what we're doing on immigration. It's morally wrong to cut social services when we're not prepared to make the rich pay at least this much of the great amount of money that made during the sacrifices that the low and middle class people have paid and continue to pay.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Schley.
First of all, to reform the immigration, you have to first love the immigrants, in particular in your own district, starting with that district. Then when you go to Congress, you have a sense of what they really need, and you actually can speak on behalf of them. The second part is, and Congressman was right, you have to be able to convince Congress, and you're not going to be able to convince people on the other side of the aisle when you're entrenched, when you're tied down to old policies, when you're associated with old representatives, old administrations that don't do you any good when you're negotiating. And at the end of the day, if you look at our district There's nothing indicating that the Senegalese Union on 116th Street has been loved and cared about and developed as it was at Frederick Douglass. You look at the Dykeman area, that immigrant community, if you across east side of Broadway, it's one life. On west side of Broadway, it's another life. When you go to Washington, D.C., you're speaking on behalf of the needs of the people in your district that actually bring in revenue, that bring in trade, that expand the base of your tax base, and then you move it forward. And then when you go to Congress, which I am cross-endorsed by multiple parties, you're able to negotiate fairly without being tied down to the old problems of the past, as a fresh representative ought to do.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Johnson.
I agree with all that has been said. I especially agree with what the congressman said about the moral imperative. I think it's you know, we are very polite, and when we talk about immigration, I think it's unconscionable that the DREAM Act has not passed. I think that the Congress should start again and try each and every time to do it once again. I appreciate Senator Harry Reid, who said in his lifetime or the remaining of his tenure that he will once again, every year, every opportunity he can, to come about to try for passage of the DREAM Act. But it goes to what the congressman has said fundamentally. I think that we are biased in what the picture of what the general American public thinks of what is an immigrant. It is not the Mexicans, it's not the Hispanics, it's not the folks that came across the border. It's people from all parts of the world, many who have been here for a long time. But the picture of that it's illegal, Mexicans and all of that is absolutely wrong for the very same reason that the congressman said. These are folks who have helped build many industries in this country and who now deserve a path to become a citizen in their own right. And so I'm frankly agreeing with all of my colleagues and a little bit agitated about it all.
Thank you. What changes, if any, do you believe should be made in federal health care policies and programs? Please tell us what you would recommend if the court rules out the mandate for universal participation established by the Affordable Health Care Act. Mr. Williams, would you go first, please?
More than happy to do so. First and foremost, I hope that the Supreme Court does not decimate this piece of legislation. I think it's an extremely important piece of legislation that has actually had a profound impact on our country. When you look at the fact that every president since Teddy Roosevelt has died to do something to actually reform health care, and President Obama was able to do it. The three components of that health care bill that I hope, no matter what happens, that Congress or some way will find a way to keep it intact. One, that no longer can insurance companies discriminate because of pre-existing conditions. Two, that they can no longer put an actual cap on the amount of money that is actually spent on an illness. And three, that young people have the ability to stay on their parents' insurance policy till the age of 26, which is a profound thing in which over the last year or so has made it possible for millions of young people to actually have health insurance coverage.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
As I said once before, and as Clyde has said and others agree, we don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do. And I think the tragedy in all of this is that the Supreme Court has now taken up a legislative responsibility far beyond what it has ever been, and certainly they are activists. So since they have taken up a legislative responsibility, and the real responsibility for legislation rests with the Congress, and I believe that the President's Affordable Health Care Act, as it's called, was sound and it's just. And yes, indeed, the same way that we have our citizens pay for licenses and other things for the greater good, I think there's nothing wrong with requiring folks to pay for minimum health care. So that the Supreme Court, and that seems to be the component which is most in question or in jeopardy of being turned down, I would then come back to Congress and start all over again, override the Supreme Court, and reinstate the Affordable Health Care Act as the President intended.
Thank you. Mr. Schley.
I think it would be an excellent opportunity if the Supreme Court were to send this back to Congress and allow us an opportunity to bring in a public option. My district that I love, I care about, I'm talking to people every day, we are in an economic platform that we're making $16,000 to $28,000. 87% of us are in that tax bracket. We can't afford the premiums of insurance. And if you had a public option among the other private policies there, it would take a burden off of small businesses. I think this is something that a new congressman like myself would have an opportunity to do. I would bring to bear the freshness of mind, the agile thinking, and bringing the actual needs of my district to the platform, because it's not discussed. We're only talking about what's best for the nickel and dimes in an insurance policy, but the actual insurance benefits that the people in my district need, they cannot afford to buy private insurance. So a public option has to be among the choices on the table. This would be an opportunity to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Espaillat.
The president's plan was a very ambitious plan, and one that was embraced by the majority of the American people. Unfortunately, the president's plan was watered down. Pressure was put upon Congress by the pharmaceutical, by the insurance companies. This original plan that created hope and opportunity for health care for all, presented by President Obama, was sabotaged, frankly, by these big companies. And now here we have an activist Supreme Court meddling in congressional affairs. It's highly, highly unprecedented. And I would agree with some of my colleagues here that some of the provisions included in the Health Care Reform Act are good provisions, particularly young people being in their parents' insurance policy until they're 26 years old. That's a great benefit to many working families. But in addition to that, I think that there are many small businesses that are uncompetitive because they do not provide health care. Many people make a job decision on whether or not the employer is providing health benefits. Therefore, small businesses are at a clear disadvantage in hiring the best employees possible. We must put an end to that. We must come up with an innovative idea that would allow small businesses to provide affordable health care and good health care for their employees. I think that's of critical importance. But most importantly, I think that President Obama needs help. He needs young, bold, democratic voices that will rally around him and will not allow for this to happen again if he has to present another Health Care Reform Act.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rangel.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm so excited about returning to the Congress is that this president has initiatives that all of my adult life I had wanted to support. And now I really think it's a question of national security, not just how much people hate the president if we don't move. Investments in education, investment in health care. The people are living longer. And the cost is just, we can't go through with it unless we have a plan. I was for the single payers plan. We fought hard to make certain we had the public option. You bet your life it was compromised. But the truth of the matter is, at least we got the darn thing out of the House and we could improve upon it if we had that momentum. But when people say, heck no, I don't care how good it is, that I'm not going to go along with it, knowing if we don't do something but the cost of health care. And what's one of the major reasons for it? People who get ill go to public hospitals and we all pay for it. The insurance company makes money that they shouldn't. There's no relationship between being sick and getting well with an insurance company. You really don't need it, and that's what the public option is all about, to have some competition to see what service they have. But at the end of the day, if we don't say get into a pool and at least be able to say that you are contributing to the nation's benefit, it's not going to work. Okay. Now, these Republicans know it, but darn it, they're not going to cave in until they find out whether they can knock politically this president. I don't think they will. Nothing's going to happen on anything until after the election.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry.
Recent years have seen growing use of federal contracts with private businesses to manage public facilities and projects, for example, in the military and in prisons and detention centers. Do you support this trend? And if so, what oversight do you consider necessary? Mr. Schley, would you go first, please?
I disagree with plenty of the privatization of things that ought to be handled by the public. In particular, our prisons. It invites mischief in the courts. Right in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the state that I'm from, outside of Philadelphia, a judge just 6 months ago was sentenced to 30 years because he had investments in a detention center that was overseeing the youth coming before his court. Right in my district, most of the people that are stop and frisked or individuals that are arrested go north to private detention centers. It invites extra police brutality on a district that is already suffering from excessive force. And also, I think the trend toward privatizing our postal services is something that ought not to be either. This is a country that's been founded on public service. As a public servant, I'm supportive of this type of thing, and so I walk very slowly toward that, and I keep a watchful eye, and there ought to be oversight in it.
Thank you. Mr. Rangel, would you take that question?
Privatization is only a way to get around the unions. There's no question that the middle class was actually made because of the union demands. Capitalism is great in terms of making money, but it doesn't provide for human life and health care and all those other things that people have to be involved. With privatization, one thing is clear. They're not thinking about union standards. They're thinking about lowering the standards. And if we don't have the oversight to be able to make certain that compassion fits into the capitalistic system, which is not required in privatization, then something's wrong. Besides, if you're going that way, you have to be able to say that you can do a better job. And I don't know about you, but when you find the money that's involved in the private sector with law enforcement, when you find this country now putting more people in jail than all the other countries in the world, when you find the people in upstate New York fighting to keep their prisons because it's an industry, I just don't know whether or not the profits that are involved could cause people to believe that you can make a lot of money in the private sector and not have the public policy as a part of your mandate, because public servants, like all of us would want to be, have a higher responsibility than the private sector. But if you're just there seeing what do you make on the profit and loss sheet, that's a sad day for our country.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Williams, would you take that question, please?
More than happy to do so. Privatization was supposed to be an idea that would actually save the government money. And as it turns out, as a whole, we have not seen that actually be the case. So 9 times out of 10, I would be against doing any further privatization. The thing that I think is very clear is that Republicans have come up with these various ideas that they thought would actually do something to change the direction of government. And I do agree, a part of it is to do somewhat, I think, union busting, make certain that people don't necessarily have a livable wage. But the idea that we would continue to do something that I think is negative for the overall services that are being delivered to people that the government is providing, and the fact that it's not a cost-saving measure, I would be against it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Johnson?
The private sector is the private sector, and the public sector is the public sector, and never the twain shall meet. For some of the reasons that have been discussed already, I don't think, unless there is some evidence that the private sector can do much better, without the overriding notion that private sector always does in terms of marketability, in terms of profitability, and I think that's what oftentimes leads their motives. And in leading the motives with profitability, that we're not talking about some of the cornerstones of public interest, the people. And so I would not be in favor of privatization. I would be in favor of looking at our public institutions and our contracting to make sure there is efficiency and that the taxpayers do indeed get the return on their investment.
Thank you. Mr. Espaillat?
Privatization has come since the Reagan years, when there was a frenzy for smaller government. And everybody rushed to the gate and attempted to support this notion that smaller government was better. I believe very strongly that government is a force of good, and that in fact there are certain programs that are very dear and near to all of us that should be run by government. Hospitals, for example, should be run by government. Schools also should be run by government. Prisons should be administered by government. Anytime you bring the private sector in, other motors come into play. The money factor comes into play. The competitiveness over contract comes into play. There is very little transparency in many cases as to how contracts are issued. So I think that government is a force of good. We should continue to work together with Congress, and the White House should work very closely together to end this frenzy, to bring about smaller government that translates into privatization or the merging of departments that usually results in the firing of employees that further aggravates this deteriorating economy. So I believe that government is a force of good, and I am against privatization.
Thank you, sir. NATO has now set a timetable for the removal of troops from Iraq and Afghanistan. It appears that the United States will bear most of the financial and human costs for this transition. Do these plans have your support? Mr. Espaillat, would you take that first, please?
I believe very strongly that we should pull out of the war. We should do so in a responsible fashion. I think that we should also consider the safety of the region. But much has been paid by our nation. It has crippled our economy. It has contributed to our deteriorating economy. You know, we cannot continue to shoulder the burden, the economic burden of this war. So I am a strong supporter of ending the war. In the state legislature, I presented resolutions opposing the escalation of the war into Iraq. And I think that the region is although it's still very unstable, and we must keep an eye on it through NATO, we very much should pull out of the war as quickly as possible. We should do so in a responsible way, but this war has gone on for much too long. Many lives have been lost, and it's time we pull out of it.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Johnson?
I believe that applaud NATO for saying pull out. But the United States has always, with the United Nations and NATO, always borne a disproportionate impact on the resources. Whenever anything is done in this global society, in enforcement, United States has borne the greater cost disproportionate to who we are. And so while I support it, I would have to look at these measures that are unilaterally set, and they may be just, but not until all the nations involved come up with their fair share, because it is a financial burden to us. It continues to be. It's been long-standing, and it must end. So yes, the pullout, but we will pay our fair share, as all other nations should be obligated to do likewise.
Okay. Mr. Rangel.
Well, any lives that can be saved, and a lot of our troops will be in danger. Not everybody's coming home. And I'm not one person just to get so excited about this, because I can't be proud of a country that goes into war without the consent of Congress. We haven't had a president declare war with the consent of Congress since World War II. And president after president puts our young men and women in harm's way. And I really believe if you say that you want to go into an area, whether it's for oil or for whatever reason, that if you say there's going to be a draft and if we declare war, your kids and grandkids would have to go, that we will be a little more concerned about how swiftly we get involved in these wars. Having said that, the guys that are coming home, I don't think are getting a fair shake. They're among the highest unemployment. The veterans from past wars and now are included in the homeless. And so it's not whatever improvement the president is doing. NATO talks, but it doesn't act. The Arabs really want us to do it, but they won't join in and say doing it.
Okay, sir.
And so, hey, It's a step in the right direction, but a direction we never should have taken.
Mr. Schley.
Martin Luther King said, we cannot have butter and bullets at the same time. We have a $902 billion budget. Along with, so the answer is yes, we have to come home. We have to scale it down. There's no way that we can survive as a nation at this, of going to war at this rate. It would also work with, in the short term, of building the economy with the short-term job creation if we had a little more shifting of money from the defense budget to the areas that we need most, housing and education. I'm all for that. And it comes to my mind the two friends that I lost in the past 7 years to war. I cannot explain or actually erase the reality that this is what the outcome is. Not money, not winning, because we're not winning wars today. Lives in our district. They come home unemployed, hooked on drugs, and needing everything from a family to care, and then they even need insurance. So it's a losing situation, and I definitely say we have to scale down, but scale down in a way that's effective, but ultimately bring the troops home and shift the budget to where we need it.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
I believe your question was whether or not NATO was playing its fair share in reference to the war. And it had something to do also, I think, with Afghanistan and Iraq, if I am correct.
Not quite. Is it just whether you support the plans that NATO approved to bring all the troops out in 2014?
Well, I definitely support the plan to bring troops out. The president has made it clear that he has an exit strategy in reference to bringing the troops out. NATO has always played an active role in being a participant in things around the world, but ultimately the United States is the one who typically pays for these things, not only just in Afghanistan and Iraq, but also when you look at what's taking place in Libya. We paid the majority of that. NATO got involved in that process, but it ultimately ended up on our shoulders. And the same thing if we decide, or if anyone decides to do something in Syria, it will be the United States again. So it is my hope that we don't get involved in any more conflicts around the world, and that we do what is necessary, I think, to continue to use sanctions, to continue to have conversations, and have Kofi Annan, as he's doing right now, trying to do something in Syria, and use the Secretary of State as a vehicle to try to bring about change and conflict around the world before we actually go to war. And I do agree with the Congressman. I believe if people really had to sacrifice themselves and had their children and grandchildren that were drafted to go off to war, I think we as a country would see this whole process very differently. And so I do believe that we need to bring about real change in America without trying to go to war with the various countries around the world.
Thank you. We have just a few minutes left for questions, so I'm going to ask you a question that I really think, I hope you can answer very briefly, and that is...
Haven't we?
This is a couple of, one or two words. There have been several proposals for prolonging the life of Social Security, including removal of the cap on the amount of earnings subject to Social Security tax. Would you support this? Mr. Espaillat?
I would not support it. I think that there are several things about America that are fundamentally great. And one of them is ensuring that once you play by the rules, you worked hard, you pay your taxes, that there is a guarantee for your golden years, and that you will have...
I think you misunderstood my question, sir.
I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
Would you support removing the cap on the amount of earnings that are taxed?
No, I would not support that.
Okay.
I would not support I would not support that. Again, let me go back to the the Social Security issue. I think that it is a great country that offers for senior citizens the ability to have benefits, to have a certain degree of income, and I will fight very hard to keep that.
Okay. Mr. Schley, would you support removal of the cap on the tax, on the amount of earnings taxed for Social Security?
No.
You would leave the cap in place?
Right.
Ms. Johnson?
I would grandfather it, godfather it, or grandmother it for the contemporary recipients. Okay. And perhaps look at it, down the road, because something must be done as we are living much longer. So there's a lesser expectation for those coming into the system now than it was for Congressman Rangel's generation, mine too.
Mr. Williams, would you support removing the cap on the amount of earnings that are taxed?
I would support lifting the cap on the amount of earnings that are taxed under Social Security. Right now it's $110,000, and I would actually support looking at exploring the possibility of lifting it, but I wouldn't do it under these circumstances.
Okay.
I wouldn't do it where a
Stop
person.
there. Mr. Rangel, would you support the
No,
removal of the cap?
I really don't believe. We have a contract with rich and poor folks, and if you break that contract, it could become a welfare program. We have obligations to pay an equal share as far as taxes is concerned. Social Security is a contract that individuals have with their government.
Okay, thank you, sir. It's now time for the closing statements. So we'll go in the order in which we opened. Mr. Rangel, you're first. 1.5 minutes each, please.
Well, again, I have to thank you. This has been a very educational discussion, and I have been more pleased with the knowing that the candidates all are sincere in wanting to represent this very, very exciting congressional district. I look at it as though they're applying for my job. And while nobody seems to believe that I haven't done a good job, I think the thing is it's time for a change. Well, we all are putting applications in. And if you take a look at our background and training and try to figure out what's good for this country at this time, who has produced and not who would like to produce, I kind of think that the job would be weighted in my favor. But that's what this process is all about, to let the public decide. We put out our credentials, we put out what we like to do, we put out what we have done, and hopefully on June the 26th, people would make that decision, and I hope it would be in my favor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Espaillat.
Well, thank you for all the candidates for coming here to this important debate.
You're welcome.
I think that what happens very often is when one feels when they've been on a job too long that there's just absolutely nobody in the planet that can do as good as a job as you do. And I think that's fundamentally flawed. I think there's lots of folks, young people, that have talents, sometimes hidden talents, that want to do a good job. I think that this juncture in history provides a historic opportunity for change, to turn the page. Congressman Ackerman in Queens decided to move on. Congressman Towns in Brooklyn decided also to move on. I think it is time for change. It's in the air. I believe that we need a bold new voice in Congress. I believe that I will be that voice, and I hope that I can get the support of the majority of voters on June 26th.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Johnson.
I want to thank you all for this forum. I think, like the Congressman said, it's been very informative. And I think it's right that he has characterized it, as I often have, in terms of I'm applying for a job. I'm applying for a job that I think that I have built a career, the skills and ability that is appropriate for the job. This is not about a person. I have spent 40 years, like I said, cross-sector, private sector, government. I have a passion for public service. And I, like others, I am hungry to build a legacy. I want to be the congressperson to build a legacy like Charlie Rangel has. And so this is Joyce Johnson wanting to do her part in the job that I've looked for 25 plus years, the job that I am prepared for and ready to serve. And so I'm asking on June 26th for the residents, my fellow constituents, to hire me to be your nominee for Congress representing the 13th Congressional District. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Thank you for having this forum tonight, and thank you for inviting me, and I'd say thanks to the other candidates for participating in this forum. I believe that the most important thing about this election this time around right now is not about the congressman, it's not about any of us sitting here. It's really about the community, about our country, and the direction we want to see our country move into. The other thing that we need to understand is this, that Congress has changed and Washington has changed a great deal over the last 50 years. When you look at the people now who are entrenched and who want to do everything humanly possible to decimate government as we know it in Washington, D.C., who want to get rid of Medicaid, Social Security, and Medicare, People who will do everything to make certain that the president is not as successful with his agenda. The Eric Cantors of the world, the Paul Ryan who introduced a budget that he wants to balance on the back of poor people and working class people. These people are entrenched, and they will do whatever is humanly possible that they can do to make certain that government as we know it does not exist. And I want to have the opportunity to push back on that. I want to have the opportunity to actually work with a Congress and with a administration that I believe can do incredible things to move this country in the right direction. And I believe that my background and my skills make me uniquely qualified in order to serve. And so I look forward to having the opportunity to continue this debate. I hope I have the opportunity to represent this community. And I hope that more than anything else that people come out and vote on June the 26th.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Schley?
Thank you very, very much to all my colleagues here and to the people I represent. I think this is a very unique opportunity. And just to make it clear, it's not up for our current representatives to step down. It's up to us to step up, as once he did. Just after man walked on the moon is when we went to another direction in this district. That's how long we've been under this particular direction. And it comes a time that a people and a generation has to speak for themselves and make a choice, and not just be from someone we care about and we love. Don't ever ask a voter to have to vote, or to ask whether they will vote for someone they care about or have to choose between their children being able to work, being able to graduate from high school, being able to be employed, being able to not be displaced from their district. These are the things that are forcing the community to come out, and while I'm here. So I'm asking the district and the people I know I represent to hire me, because I'm not connected to anything but you. And this is an opportunity that we move this nation forward by example and through this district saying, hey, this is where we're going to go. And just want to note, this concept of experience, this is an argument that would not have let our current representative in office when he started. It's fresh, it's green, change is certain, and it's going to come June 26th, and the people are going to speak for the things that they need, which is housing, to make sure HUD provides the type of homes that they can afford to live in, and provide a way in which these small businesses can afford to do business. And I'm asking my district to allow me to do that, not from the street, but from United States Congress. That's why I'm running for Congress, and I want you to come out on June 26th.
Thank you all. Now that you have heard the views of these candidates on these important issues, please remember to vote on June 26th. If you are a registered voter and you are enrolled in the Democratic Party and reside in the 13th District, you are eligible to vote in this election. Please note, if you are a registered voter and you are enrolled in the Republican Party, you also have a role to play on June 26th. There is a contest statewide for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Kirsten Gillibrand, who is unopposed for renomination as the Democratic candidate. As usual, all polling places will be open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. on June 26th. There will be another primary election in September, on September the 13th, a Thursday, to select candidates for party nomination to the State Assembly and State Senate. So please be alert to information about that election and those candidates. Voter registration forms, applications for absentee voting, and sample ballots are available at on the League of Women Voters website at the address shown on your screen, www.lwvnyc.org, or at the Board of Elections. If you are in doubt about your district and after redistricting, or for any other question about elections and voting, call the League's telephone information service, which is answered from 10 to 4 on weekdays. That number is 212-725-3541. On behalf of the League, thank you to MNN for producing and presenting this debate, and many thanks to the candidates for their participation. Good night.
Thank you.